This is the second video in my series on the map of consciousness and how that helped my understanding of where I grew up. In part one, we introduced the idea of this map of consciousness. We got a caveat. We said, hey, we're just going to trust this data as it was founded by David R. Hawkins. We're just going to say it's okay. And then we discussed the levels and the predominant emotional states that go along with some of them. And if you want to know more about this process and what led up to here, and I highly, highly encourage you to check out this video where we talked about my growing up in an elementary school in a very small town community and some of my home life. So now that we have the intro out of the way, we're going to discuss the 200 line. The 200 line is very important to understand because we have to introduce a new archetype. When I moved from a school in the country, to a school in the city, I was introduced in rather large numbers to a new archetype of individual. We'll call this the survival mode here. The basic emotions that they feel most are fear, anger, and maybe they get to pride. Their floor is typically apathy, and their ceiling is typically anger. They have a highly defensive, reactive worldview, seeking respect through aggression or shutting down completely. The school system, to them, feels like a prison. So on this line, there's this survival paradigm you'll see here, which is basically anything below 200 or 187 and a half, which is this line here. And as you can see, these are some rather terrible emotions to feel. And the reason it's called the survival paradigm is because these individuals are stuck in this mode of grief, of apathy, of guilt. They have regret, despair, blame. They feel humiliated at times. They're miserable. This is likely due to their home life, and this is just the result of poverty in some environments. And as I grew up in a small rural town, poverty is just, it's there. It really is there. And if we look at how these relate to some of the other archetypes on the scale, they're right here, right? Most of their life, they go well below this 200 line in the survival mode, and they don't escape it very often. In future videos, we'll talk about the escape. But this video is really to just demonstrate where they are and to meet them where they at and to figure out how that changed my worldview as a fourth grader going into a new elementary school in the city. So we've introduced the 200 line. Now let's talk about the country club royalty and the insulated air. So Mr. Country Club royalty, his keywords are pride, neutrality, and he feels pride from where he comes from. He lives in the country club. He's got a decent family. Everything from the outside looking in looks great, but his ceiling caps out at this neutrality. He gets a lifted Z71 truck at 16, wears Costa, Salt Life, guaranteed job in the family business or in a higher class white collar job within the town. And he has unquestioned confidence in his hometown as he grew up in a great country club community. So if we translate the bottom 175 to the top 250 on our levels chart, we can see that these guys have real pride, which is a survival paradigm emotion, but most of their life is much above the survival line. And really, this pride is not seen as a survival instinct to most people. He is able to operate in trust and is satisfied with his life, and maybe even gets into some willingness and optimism in the future. He also exhibits courage and is able to take action beyond what he knows. Next, we'll go to the insulated air. They have a floor of 200 courage and an acceptance of 350 is their ceiling. And these guys really get to the acceptance and the reasoning, and they enjoy growing up in a small town because they're quite insulated from the struggles of the poor kids. They're destined for a big SEC school Greek life organization, think UGA, Auburn, and they've got a very high social capital and standing within the local community. These guys are solidly in this environment. They've accepted where they are. They can forgive others. They're harmonious. They're merciful, and they're transcending above the lower levels down here of consciousness. Now, if we look at these two guys, these two archetypes, compared to the chart entirely, the country club kid and the insulated air, these guys are solidly in this green zone for most of their life, most of their emotions. And this allows them to really look beyond the hometown in some respects and see what there is in the future out there. And they're not locked in this survival mode below this 200, figuring out what their lives are, just how to get the next meal. They're able to get out of the survival paradigm and get into a reason and integrity mindset. If I had to summarize the difference between these two, between these two sections here in one sentence, it would be these guys are worried about how they're going to get their next meal, and these guys are worried about where they're going to college, if they're going to college, and where they're going to trade school if they're not going to college. They're able to worry about other things because they can afford it. So we've introduced these guys. Next, we'll introduce the mentor archetype. The mentor archetype has a floor of 310 and a ceiling of about 400. Their average level is sitting at 355, sitting them well above anything else we've met so far. And their keywords are hopeful, harmonious, meaningful. And their worldview is that they see the good and the bad within the community. They're able to sit on top of everything and see every individual level below them. And they're focused on creating change within the new future generations. So let's quickly look at this on our chart. So these guys are sitting right in this level up here. Names of these levels are reason and acceptance. And they understand and they forgive all of these levels down here. Their view of life is that they're really driving meaning into the world and that they're harmonious with their community around them. So now let's talk about these three experiences here, right? So we've got the bus. What does the bus mean to me? Well, when I went to a new elementary school, I had to take the bus to where my mom worked after school, which was the middle school. And these were in the city. And I was introduced onto a bus where 90% of the kids on this bus were in survival mode. This was my first experience, prolonged daily experience with kids that were in survival mode. The first time in my life during 4th grade. These kids were constantly in fear, in anger, in pride. Maybe they got to pride. These 10 minutes every single day while I was on the bus was filled with experiencing these kids. And so for me, it taught me that not only, we'll say I was just here, it taught me that this existed down here. I'd spent most of my life comfortably above this 200 line, and I had no idea that these kids existed. I had no idea. And so this really opened my eyes moving to a city for the first time to this survival paradigm. But this wasn't the only experience that I had. I was enrolled in gifted class when I moved to the city school. In gifted, I met and spent one day a week, it was Thursday, with a community mentor in a room where we were challenged as students to operate at a higher level. And we were with children who were all able, we were in a safe environment, because remember, our mentors are operating at these levels up here. So they were creating a safe environment so that the kids, we could get to trust, we could get to optimism, and that we could get to forgiveness of our peers. And this area is where we begin to reason. And once we can reason, we can grow beyond what we currently are. And this is where really, really high-end thoughts were developed in my 4th and 5th grade mind. This is one of the ways that my education system really, really benefited me. And as I live on now, I realize that some individuals that I now go to school with, they had this environment their entire lives, and they never had the survival mode run-ins with these individuals. And there is something to be said about that. That's not the purpose of this video. This is to explain the environment. What I want to now introduce is how you are the sum of the 5 people around you. And we will go into further depth in this in future videos and explain it with more mathematical terms. For now, let's just introduce the concept. We'll do the difference in the bus and the gifted classes. We'll go bus, and we'll go gifted. And we're just going to use round numbers here to make it easy. Let's say that in the bus, you've got 5 kids at a 100 level. This is the survival mode peer. And then we'll say that we've got somewhere in the delta of these two, in between these two, we'll call it 250. And you have one kid at 250. So that is 500 plus 250 equals 750. 750 divided by 6 is roughly 125 average consciousness per person. So 125 per person is the average consciousness level of our bus environment. In our gifted environment, we'll say that there are 5 kids at 250. And we'll say that there is one mentor exhibiting a level of 350 to make the math a little bit easier. And this is 6 individuals. So we've got 6 individuals operating at 5 times 250. So that's 1250 plus 350. So 13 plus 3, 16. And so in this gifted environment, we've got 6 individuals. 1600 divided by 6 is roughly 266 and some change. So we've got 6 individuals operating at 266 level per person. And so during the afternoon bus ride, I was getting an average consciousness level of 125. And if you compare that to an average consciousness level in gifted class versus 266, and then we go to our chart and we say 155 right here at anger and 266 at willingness, which is optimism, trust, neutrality here. This is the difference between being able to learn and reason, and the difference between just being in survival, thinking about what is next, and not able to look up and see anything above this 200 line. And that was my introduction to different socioeconomic classes, different consciousness levels, as I was a kid going to my second city elementary school. In the next video, we'll be talking about how these individuals work together in these environments in football, in gifted class, and we'll go into a little more depth, and the impact on my life through a story where I actually dipped down into a survival mode state.